I want you to picture this. You are sitting on a really long, exhausting 10-hour flight.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. The cabin lights are completely dimmed. Everyone around you is asleep. And you just have that low, constant hum of the engine just kind of drowning out the world.
Yeah, you're in that sort of travel purgatory.
Exactly. Or, maybe picture yourself hunched over an old, chunky, gray Game Boy. The screen is barely illuminated by those passing street lamps outside a car window.
Oh, the nostalgia is heavy with that one.
It really is. But in either of those scenarios, you are completely zoned out. Your eyes are just glued to this tiny screen, watching the hypnotic, entirely inevitable descent of four-block shapes.
Right, Tetris.
It is Tetris. And by all outward appearances, it is just the simplest video game in the entire world. I mean, you move left, you move right, you rotate, you clear lines. It feels so clean.
Yeah, it's very binary. Very simple.
Right. But the stack of sources we are diving into today reveals that this supposedly simple game hides a backstory that is, honestly, anything but orderly.
Oh, it's an absolute mess.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate distillation of order from chaos on the screen, but behind the scenes, pure chaos.
Pure chaos. We are talking about a narrative drenched in Soviet bureaucracy, accidental international corporate espionage.
Which is wild to even say out loud.
I know. And it goes all the way to a modern-day metagame where actual teenagers are literally breaking decades-old software using biomechanics, friction, and, muscle tremors.
Yeah, the physical toll is something we absolutely have to get into.
We really do. So our mission for this deep dive is to trace that impossible evolution. We are going to follow Tetris from a 1984 Cold War prototype locked behind the Iron Curtain all the way to a 2026 esports phenomenon.
And really understand how human ingenuity continually shatters the boundaries of what developers in society honestly consider completely impossible.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to understand how we get to kids breaking the physical limits of the game today, we really have to start with the original code and, the environment that birthed it.
Right, which was not some slick tech startup in Silicon Valley.
Not at all. The date is June 6, 1984. The place is the Soviet Academy of Sciences Computer Center in Moscow.
Okay.
And we are looking at a researcher named Alexei Pajitnov. Now, his actual state-assigned job is researching speech recognition software.
Which I have to point out is incredibly high-level, serious scientific research for the Soviet government. I mean, he is not a game designer.
No, not at all.
He is a computer scientist working during the absolute height of the Cold War.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But the Academy gets its hands on some new hardware, specifically an Electronica 60.
Okay. What is that?
Well, to give you an idea of what we are dealing with here,
Hmm.
this is a very rudimentary text-based computer system.
Like no mouse, no graphics?
Zero. It does not even have a graphical interface as we would understand it today. There were no pixels drawing pretty pictures, just text.
Wow.
So Pajitnov decides to create a few little programs to, as he put it, test the hardware's computing limits.
I have to pause here because I just love that detail so much.
It's classic, right?
It is the classic, I am just testing the hardware excuse for writing a video game on company time.
Yeah, some things transcend borders.
It really proves that no matter what era or what political system you live in, programmers will always find an excuse to make toys.
It is a universal constant of computing for sure.
Right.
So he's using very simplistic text-based graphics. I mean, literally using brackets, like an open bracket and a closed bracket sitting next to each other to represent the solid blocks.
That is so incredibly rudimentary.
It was. And he creates the first prototype of Tetris.
Mm-hmm.
The blocks are technically called tetrominoes, which are just geometric shapes composed of four squares connected orthogonally.
Right.
He programs the basic logic. He gets these bracket blocks falling down the screen. And as he fine-tunes the game, something highly unexpected happens.
He gets hooked.
He cannot stop playing his own hardware test. He becomes hopelessly addicted to it.
And it is not just a personal obsession, right?
Yeah.
The sources show that he shares this little program via floppy disk with his colleagues at the academy.
Yeah, he passes it around.
And they all catch the bug. It spreads throughout Moscow, bouncing from computer to computer, from lab to lab.
It was an epidemic.
It becomes such a massive, undeniable drain on productivity that the Moscow Medical Institute actually issues a formal decree explicitly banning the game from their computers.
Which is just incredible. The mechanism of its spread is what really stands out here. I mean, think about the era. There is no internet.
Right.
There is no marketing budget. There is literally an iron curtain actively restricting the flow of information.
Yeah, it's totally locked down.
Yet Tetris bypasses all of it. purely through psychological friction. It was a viral digital phenomenon decades before the concept of going viral even existed.
It's like the perfect digital virus.
Exactly. But Pajitnov faces a massive hurdle here because he created this on a state-owned computer at a state-run academy. Under Soviet law, private intellectual property just doesn't exist the way it does in the West.
So he can't just patent it and start a company.
No, the game is considered the property of the state. If he tries to sell it himself, he isn't just an entrepreneur, he's a criminal.
Wow.
So he essentially relinquishes the rights to Tetris to the Soviet Academy for 10 years.
And that single legal concession, just handing it over, is the spark that ignites a massive intellectual property disaster.
Oh, a total nightmare.
Let's fast forward a little bit. By 1986, the game makes its way across the border into Hungary via these IBM PC ports. Hackers and programmers are sharing it around.
Yeah, it's making its way west.
Right. And it catches the eye of a man named Robert Stein. Now, Stein works for a UK-based company called Andromeda Software.
Right, he's a software scout, essentially.
Yes. And he sees this highly addictive game, immediately recognizes its potential to make millions in the Western market, and decides he needs to buy the rights.
He sees dollar signs.
Absolutely. But he can't just send an email, obviously. So he sends a telex to Pajitnov.
Yeah, and for those who might not know, a telex is essentially a precursor to the fax machine. It's a network of teleprinters that send text-based messages over telegraph lines.
So Stein sends this telex offering a licensing deal. And Pajitnov receives it and replies that, he is interested in making a deal, but his intent is to continue negotiations with the proper Soviet authorities.
Right, because as we established, he doesn't actually own the game.
Exactly. And I am just hung up on how spectacularly Stein misreads this situation.
It's pretty bold.
Pajitnov essentially says, "Sounds interesting, let me talk to my bosses." And Stein interprets this basic expression of interest as a legally binding acceptance of his offer.
Yeah, he just runs with it.
He doesn't wait for a formal contract. He doesn't secure a signature.
The audacity is staggering.
Yeah.
But, it really highlights the Wild West nature of software publishing at the time. Stein takes this completely non-existent contract and turns around to sell the licensing rights to two different massive companies.
Without owning them.
Without owning a thing. He sells the European rights to Microsoft and the United States rights to Spectrum Holobyte.
I have to put this in perspective. This is like me renting out your apartment on Airbnb before I even ask if I can stay there.
Right.
And then somehow leasing it out to two different families at the exact same time.
That's a perfect analogy.
The sheer confidence it takes to pull that off is wild.
And keep in mind, the game hasn't officially legally left the Soviet Union yet. Neither Microsoft nor Spectrum Holobyte know that Stein's underlying rights are basically built on sand.
They think it's a done deal.
Exactly. So they launched the game in the West, leaning heavily into the exotic Soviet origin. They put images of St. Basil's Cathedral and cosmonauts on the box art.
Right, they really played up the Cold War angle.
Oh, heavily. They market it as the game from behind the Iron Curtain. And it becomes a smash hit.
Yeah.
The money is just rolling in.
Of course.
But just before the massive commercial launch, Stein gets a tap on the shoulder from an organization called ELORG.
Okay, let's break down ELORG, because they are kind of the looming antagonist, or honestly, perhaps the only rational actor in this entire corporate farce.
Yeah, it depends on how you look at it. Elektronor-Technica, or ELORG, was the state-owned government agency handling the import and export of all computer software and hardware in the Soviet Union.
The ultimate bureaucratic gatekeepers.
Exactly. They are the officials. They contact Stein and deliver a very blunt message. They basically say, Alexei Pajitnov had no authority to give you anything. You have no rights. You are selling stolen Soviet property.
Oh man, Stein must have been sweating bullets at this point.
Panic mode, absolutely.
He has major corporations banking on a game he doesn't own. So he scrambles, he flies to Moscow, and finally in 1988, he manages to sign an actual legitimate agreement with ELORG for a 10-year worldwide license.
Yep.
Crisis averted, right? Except he misses one crucial microscopic detail in the paperwork. That license was explicitly and exclusively for computer systems.
And that semantic distinction right there is everything. Because Stein had already sold rights he didn't technically own, a massive, tangled knot of sub-licenses had already spread across the globe like a fungus.
It was everywhere.
Right. Microsoft, thinking they owned everything, sold the arcade rights to Tengen, which was a subsidiary of the arcade giant Atari.
Okay.
Tengen then sub-licensed the Japanese arcade rights to Sega, and the Japanese home console rights to a man named Hank Rogers, who ran a company called Bulletproof Software.
Okay, stop right there. Notice how far away we are from a quote-unquote computer system now?
We are miles away.
We are talking arcades and home consoles. Literally none of this was authorized by Elorg.
None of it. And while Stein is busy selling air and Tenjin is sub-licensing that air to Japan, a completely different massive force is entering the picture.
Right, it's early 1989.
Nintendo. They are secretly developing the Game Boy, which is their first major handheld console, and they need a game to package with it.
They need a killer app.
Exactly. So Hank Rogers, who thinks he holds the console rights in Japan, goes to Nintendo and convinces them that Tetris is the ultimate pack-in title. He tells them, and this is a famous quote, "If you package it with Mario, you sell Game Boys to little boys. If you package it with Tetris, you sell Game Boys to everyone."
Which is arguably one of the greatest pieces of business advice ever given in the gaming industry.
It really is. It changed everything. But Nintendo is a very conservative company. They want the worldwide handheld rights locked down tight before they commit. They are not taking chances. So they send Rogers to secure them.
And this collision of interests leads to one of the most absurd, high-stakes weeks in business history. We are talking about the Moscow Showdown of February 1989.
It's like a spy thriller.
3 men descend on Moscow in the exact same week, and none of them know the others are there. You have Hank Rogers representing Nintendo, you have Robert Stein desperately trying to secure the arcade and console rights he already sold, and you have Kevin Maxwell, the son of billionaire media mogul Robert Maxwell, who owns Microsoft.
Right, so let's set the stage here. Moscow in 1989 is a tense place.
Very.
The Soviet Union is beginning to fracture, but it is still a heavily monitored, rigidly controlled environment. Rogers is in Moscow on a tourist visa.
Which is a huge red flag.
Huge. Conducting unsanctioned international business on a tourist visa is strictly forbidden and genuinely dangerous. He doesn't speak a word of Russian. He doesn't know the protocols.
So what does he do?
He just shows up uninvited at Elorg headquarters, hires an interpreter on the fly outside, and somehow manages to bluff his way into a meeting with the president of Elorg, Nikolai Belikov.
I am fascinated by Belikov's role in this. I mean, he is a Soviet bureaucrat suddenly dealing with these slick Western capitalists. How does Rogers even play this?
Well, Rogers decides to be completely transparent. He wants to show Belikov how successful the game is, so he proudly pulls out a Famicom copy of Tetris.
The Famicom being the Japanese equivalent of the Nintendo Entertainment System?
Right, the NES. He shows this cartridge to Belikov, expecting praise, expecting him to be happy about the success.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. Belikov is utterly shocked. The temperature in the room just completely drops. Belikov looks at the cartridge and essentially says, "This is an illegal copy. We never authorized this. We only gave Robert Stein rights to home computers."
Imagine the sinking feeling in Rogers' stomach in that exact moment.
Oh, devastating.
He thought he was completely legitimate. He traces his rights back to Tenjin, who traces them to Microsoft, who traces them to Stein. So Rogers, using all his charm and honestly just desperation, physically maps out this convoluted web of sub-licenses for Belikov.
He draws it all out.
He explains how computer rights morphed into arcade rights and then into console rights, entirely without Elorg's knowledge.
And Belikov is a shrewd negotiator. He's listening to this, and he immediately realizes two things. First, Elorg has been cut out of millions of dollars in royalties.
Yeah, they've been robbed, basically.
And second, Robert Stein has been lying to him.
Big time.
So Belikov summons Stein for a separate meeting, but he doesn't confront him about the consoles directly. Instead, he presents Stein with a revised contract, ostensibly just to, add some penalties for late payments.
A little administrative update.
Exactly. But buried deep in the technical language of that contract is a strict, undeniable definition of a computer. It defined the computer exclusively as a machine with a monitor, disk drives, and a keyboard.
Oh, that is a brilliant surgical trap.
It's masterful.
By signing that, Stein is legally severing his own legs. He locks himself out of any future claim to home consoles or handhelds because, obviously, a Nintendo or a Game Boy doesn't have a keyboard and disk drives.
Nope. And Stein, perhaps he was distracted or just arrogant, he signs it without fully processing the implications.
Unbelievable.
He hands the console rights back to the Soviet Union without even realizing it. Meanwhile, Belikov takes a meeting with the third man in town, Kevin Maxwell from Microsoft.
Right, the billionaire's son.
Belikov shows Maxwell the Famicom cartridge that Rogers had left behind. Maxwell, incredibly arrogant and completely ignorant of his own company's messy sub-licensing chain, looks at the cartridge, claims it must be a pirated copy, and demands the console rights.
He demands them.
Yeah, he leaves the meeting completely empty-handed, only securing the right to bid on future console rights.
He practically insults the man holding all the cards.
That was a terrible strategy.
So, with Stein neutralized and Maxwell out of the picture, Roger steps in. He offers Belikov a massive clean deal directly with Nintendo, a guaranteed per-cartridge royalty. No middlemen, no shady sub-licenses.
The clean slate.
Roger secures the handheld and home console rights directly for Nintendo. Nintendo packs Tetris with the Game Boy, and it goes on to sell over 30 million Tetris cartridges. It literally creates an empire.
It does. And the macro perspective here is vital. This showdown isn't just about a video game. It highlights the absolute lack of transparency and the fundamental incompatibility of intellectual property law between the East and West during the Cold War.
Right, they were operating on completely different paradigms.
Exactly. The West saw software as a gold rush, right? A commodity to be carved up and sold as fast as possible. The Soviet system saw it as state property to be managed carefully. The legal framework simply didn't exist to bridge that gap.
Which is why a handful of guys flying blind into Moscow ended up deciding the fate of a billion-dollar franchise.
Pure chance and chaos.
I cannot let this section end without talking about the dark trivia surrounding the Mirrorsoft side of this, because it gets really weird.
Oh, it takes a very dark turn.
When Robert Maxwell, the billionaire media baron who owned Mirrorsoft, finds out he lost the rights to Nintendo, he doesn't just hire lawyers, he tries to use international political pressure.
Yeah, he leverages everything.
He complains to the UK government. He even leverages his media contacts to appeal directly to Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev to have the Nintendo deal ripped up.
It was a massive flex of geopolitical muscle over a puzzle game.
Right. But Gorbachev had slightly bigger problems in 1989, like the impending collapse of the entire Soviet bloc.
Yet, Tetris was not a priority.
He ignored Maxwell, and the Nintendo deal held firm. And the ripple effects for the Maxwell family are staggering. The millions lost on Tetris contributed to the financial strain on Maxwell's empire. A few years later, Robert Maxwell dies under highly mysterious circumstances, falling off his luxury yacht.
The Lady Ghislaine.
Yes. Following his death, investigators discover he had illegally diverted hundreds of millions of pounds from his own company's pension funds to keep his empire afloat. His companies collapse. His son Kevin, the guy who sat in Moscow and acted arrogant with Belikov, faces the biggest bankruptcy in UK history, and his daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell.
It is a truly bizarre, chilling, historical intersection. I mean, a simple falling block puzzle created to test a monochrome computer sits at the direct center of international IP law, the foundational success of handheld gaming, and one of the most infamous financial and criminal downfalls in modern history.
It's almost too weird for fiction.
But, while Nintendo won the decisive battle in Moscow, the war was far from over. Back in the United States, Atari's subsidiary, Tengen, refused to accept defeat.
Right. Let's shift gears from Russian bureaucracy to American corporate warfare. Tengen believed they owned the console rights because of that messy sub-licensing chain from Mirrorsoft.
They weren't backing down.
When Nintendo announced they had the exclusive rights, Tengen went completely rogue. This leads us to the legendary hardware war and the mystery of the XIII chip.
Yes. To understand this war, we really have to understand Nintendo's business philosophy in the late 1980s. The video game industry had famously crashed in 1983.
Right, the Atari crash.
Exactly. Companies like Atari flooded the market with terrible, broken games. Think of the infamous E.T. cartridges that got buried in the desert. Consumers completely lost faith. So when Nintendo launched the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, they were terrified of history repeating itself.
So they instituted a draconian level of quality control. They created a strict rule. Third-party publishers could only release a maximum of 5 games a year. And Nintendo themselves controlled all the physical cartridge manufacturing.
Total monopoly.
You couldn't just print your own game and sell it for the NES.
Right. And they enforced this monopoly through hardware. Nintendo built a proprietary lockout chip into every single NES console, called the XIII system. It functioned essentially as a cryptographic handshake.
Okay, how did that work?
Well, there was a lock chip in the console and a key chip inside every authorized cartridge. When you turned the power on, the two chips would communicate. If the cartridge didn't send the correct code to the console, the XIII chip would send a continuous resetting voltage spike to the system.
So the game just wouldn't boot.
The screen would just endlessly flash. The game wouldn't play at all.
It was a digital bouncer at the door of the console. So Tengen, backed by Atari, wanted to bypass this 5-game limit. They wanted to print their own cartridges and keep all the profits. But they couldn't crack the XIII code. Their engineers tried reverse engineering it for months and failed. So they resorted to espionage.
It's one of the boldest moves in gaming history, honestly. Tenjin lawyers contacted the United States Copyright Office. They claimed they were in active litigation with Nintendo and desperately needed a copy of the copyrighted XIII source code to prepare their legal defense.
Wait, let me push back on that. They literally lied to the U.S. government to get a piece of code to hack a toy. How did that even work?
I know, it sounds absurd, but you have to remember the stakes. The NES was a multi-billion-dollar platform. Tenjin signed affidavits swearing they needed the code for a lawsuit that didn't actually exist yet.
That is just brazen.
And the Copyright Office, trusting the sworn affidavits, handed over the source code. Tenjin engineers used that documentation to finally understand the lock and key mechanism. They reverse engineered it and began manufacturing their own unauthorized cartridges.
And to distinguish them, they made the plastic casing black, unlike Nintendo's standard gray.
Yep, the infamous black carts.
And one of the flagship games on those unauthorized black cartridges was their very own version of Tetris, released in May 1989. Now, here's where the narrative takes a sharp turn into game design. Tenjin's version of NES Tetris was programmed entirely from scratch by a legendary arcade developer named Ed Log.
A brilliant programmer.
And by all critical accounts, it was objectively a much better, more robust game than the official Nintendo version.
Oh, the feature sets aren't even comparable. Tenjin's Tetris had vibrant, full-color graphics, it had cooperative modes, and most importantly, it had a highly polished, competitive two-player marathon setting. It felt like an arcade game brought right into your living room.
Meanwhile, Nintendo releases their official, legally licensed version of NES Tetris, engineered by Gunpei Yokoi, and it is incredibly no frills.
Very stripped down.
The colors look somewhat washed out and muted. It only has single-player modes. If Tenjin's version was an electric guitar, flashy, loud, full of features, Nintendo's version was a rigid, unadorned acoustic guitar.
That's a great way to put it. But yeah, the law doesn't care about which game has better graphics.
Yeah.
Armed with the airtight contract Hank Rogers secured from Nikolai Belikov in Moscow, Nintendo immediately sues Tenjin for copyright infringement.
And Nintendo wins.
Definitively. The court orders Tenjin to issue a massive recall and physically destroy hundreds of thousands of copies of their black cartridge Tetris.
Which means Tenjin's feature-rich multiplayer game was wiped from the shelves after only a month. If you wanted to play Tetris on your television, you had exactly one legal option: Nintendo's solitary, rigid, acoustic version.
And this legal victory is exactly what shaped the cultural history of the game for the next 3 decades.
It's wild to think about.
It's a fascinating example of how legal verdicts dictate mechanical reality. Because Nintendo's version 1, its specific, quirky, slightly clunky code became the definitive arena for players. To understand what players are doing today, the exploits, the hypertapping, the crashes, we have to look under the hood of that specific 1989 Nintendo cartridge.
Right. We need to understand the architecture of what was designed to be an unbeatable game.
Exactly.
Okay, let's open up the hood and look at the engine. The game has 2 primary modes, A-type and B-type. B-type is essentially a puzzle mode. You are tasked with clearing 25 lines, but the screen starts with pre-existing garbage blocks already stacked at the bottom. It's a finite challenge.
But A-type is where the competitive metagame developed. A-type is a marathon. You play until the blocks reach the top of the screen and you lose. The only goal is the highest score possible. And the scoring system the developers implement in A-type is the psychological engine that drives the entire competitive scene.
Let's talk about the math, because the math is ruthless. The points you earn scale dramatically with 2 factors: the level you are currently on and the number of lines you clear simultaneously.
Right.
If you clear 1 line, 2 lines, or 3 lines, you get a modest amount of points. But if you clear 4 lines at once, which is only possible by dropping the long, straight eyepiece down a narrow well, you achieve a Tetris.
And the game aggressively rewards you for taking the risk of building your stack high enough to score that Tetris. Let's look at the numbers. If you clear a single line at level 0, you get 40 points. If you clear a Tetris at level 0, you get 1,200 points.
That's a huge jump.
It is. Now, as you clear lines, the level counter increases. Jump ahead to level 29. A single line clear is worth 1,200 points. But a Tetris at level 29 is worth an astounding 36,000 points.
The developers specifically built that risk-reward tension into the math. It triggers a massive dopamine hit. You are constantly debating, do I play it safe and clear single lines just to survive, or do I risk letting the blocks pile up to the top of the screen just for the chance at 36,000 points?
It's gambling, essentially. And while your brain is doing this frantic risk calculus, you are listening to 8-bit renditions of classical Russian music. It's worth noting that the NES version features Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker and Bizet's Carmen.
Oh, right. It explicitly does not feature Korobaniki, which is the iconic, fast-paced tune most people associate with the franchise.
Yeah, that was strictly on the Game Boy version.
But the real boss of NES Tetris, the mechanic that defines everything that follows, isn't the scoring or the music. It is a piece of programming called DAS.
Yes, DAS stands for Delayed Auto Shift. This is the underlying logic that dictates how the pieces move horizontally when you hold down the left or right directional pad on the controller.
If you are listening to this on a smartphone or a laptop, you interact with this concept every day. The sources explain it using a brilliant analogy. It is exactly like holding down the spacebar on a Word document.
Yep.
When you press the spacebar down, the cursor moves one space immediately. Then there is a brief pause. After that pause, the cursor begins zooming across the screen continuously.
That pause is the delay in delayed auto shift. In the NES code, when you press left or right, the piece moves one grid space instantly. Then the code forces the piece to pause for exactly 16 frames.
And a frame is 160th of a second.
Right, so for 16 frames, the piece hangs in the air, doing nothing. After that delay is over, it begins moving continuously, shifting one space every 6 frames, which is about 10 times a second.
Now, in the early levels, when the blocks are floating down gently, that 16-frame pause is practically unnoticeable. You have all the time in the world to slide pieces into place.
It feels perfectly smooth.
But as you clear lines, the game level increases, and the gravity of the game intensifies. The speed at which the pieces fall automatically increases at levels 10, 13, 16, 19, getting faster and faster. And then you hit level 29.
The kill screen.
Explain exactly what happens at level 29. Why is it a kill screen?
Because the physics of the game undergo a violent shift. At level 29, the falling speed of the blocks suddenly doubles from the previous level. The pieces are dropping at a terrifying rate of 1 grid cell per frame.
1 cell per frame, meaning it takes roughly a third of a second for a piece to travel from the top of the screen all the way to the bottom.
Exactly. At that speed, the 16-frame pause built into the DAS mechanic becomes fatal. If a piece appears at the top of the screen and you hold down the D-pad to move it to the wall, it moves one space and then pauses for 16 frames.
Right.
But because gravity is pulling it down at 1 cell per frame, by the time that 16-frame horizontal pause is over, the piece has already plummeted 16 spaces down the board and locked into place in the middle of your screen.
So at level 29 speeds, you physically cannot move the pieces to the edges of the board using the intended mechanics. That pause is literally a death sentence.
It is a hard wall.
The developers built a wall. We know they never intended anyone to survive this speed because they didn't even bother programming the visual level counter to display numbers past 29 properly.
Yeah, let's talk about why the counter breaks. The game's memory uses hexadecimal code base 16 math, which uses numbers 0 through 9 and letters A through F. The programmers only created visual graphic tiles for the numbers up to 29.
Okay.
If a player somehow manages to clear enough lines to reach level 30, the game tries to pull the next graphic tile in the sequence, but there isn't one. So it pulls raw hexadecimal data. The counter glitches out and displays 00 or 0A or weird alphabetical letters.
For over 2 decades, from 1989 until roughly 2010, human beings accepted level 29 as a hard, insurmountable physical limit. It was the edge of the flat Earth. You don't sail past it.
It was accepted as fact.
Because of this soft wall, the entire strategy of the game was not about surviving forever. It was about hyper-efficient scoring before level 29 murdered your run. The ultimate goal, the holy grail of Tetris, was to reach the maximum displayable score of 999,999 points, known as the max out, before hitting the kill screen.
But humans are fundamentally stubborn creatures. We do not like being told something is impossible.
We really don't.
For years, the limit was accepted in isolation. People played in their living rooms, thought they were the best in the world, and hit the wall. But then, a community began to form. In 2010, spurred by the release of a documentary called Ecstasy of Order, the Tetris masters, the best players in the world, found each other.
And they organized the Classic Tetris World Championship, or the CTWC.
Exactly.
And this tournament, gathering the greatest minds in the game, slowly spawned a new generation of players who looked at the mechanics of the 1989 cartridge and decided that simply holding down the D-pad was for dinosaurs.
Right. To appreciate the shift, we have to look at the early years of the CTWC. The first decade was absolutely dominated by a player named Jonas Neubauer. He reached the grand finals in the first 9 iterations of the tournament, winning 7 world titles.
Wow.
Neubauer was a master of the traditional Bass technique. He was incredibly efficient, calm under pressure, and really became the beloved de facto ambassador of the game. He showed the entire world what absolute peak human performance looked like when operating within the intended physics of the game.
But the reign of DAS couldn't last forever. In 2018, the landscape of competitive Tetris shatters completely. A 16-year-old kid from California named Joseph VIII shows up to the CTWC. He is relatively unknown. He fights his way through the bracket, makes it to the grand finals, and finds himself sitting on a stage facing the 7-time world champion, Jonas Neubauer.
It was a David and Goliath story.
And Saley defeats him. He sweeps him 3-0.
It was a monumental, seismic, generational shift.
Okay.
It wasn't just a new player winning. It was an entirely new method of interacting with the machine. Joseph Saley's secret weapon was a technique called hypertapping.
Okay, I need to understand the physical mechanics of hypertapping, because this is the moment where the physics of the human body begin to forcefully override the physics of the code.
Well, the concept of hypertapping was actually originated way back in the 1990s by an early champion named Thor Ackerlund, but it was incredibly rare, highly inconsistent, and physically demanding.
So Saley refined it.
Yeah. Joseph Saley watched Neubauer's tutorials on YouTube, understood the limitations of DAS, and dedicated himself to weaponizing Ackerlund's old technique.
So how does it actually work?
Think back to the spacebar analogy. The fatal flaw of DAS is the 16-frame pause when you hold the button down.
Right.
A hypertapper simply never holds the button down. Instead of pressing and holding the D-pad, a hypertapper physically flexes their arm, vibrating their thumb to tap the D-pad 10 to 15 times a second.
10 to 15 times a second.
Every single tap registers as a new individual button press to the console. By manually pressing the button for every single grid movement, they completely bypass the 16-frame delay.
They are essentially turning their forearm into a jackhammer. By vibrating their hand, they are sending raw input signals faster than the game's internal delay timer can even register.
Precisely.
And because hypertappers aren't held back by that pause, they can move pieces to the edges of the board instantly, which means
suddenly the kill screen wasn't a kill screen anymore. It was just another fast level. If you could move the pieces fast enough, you could survive level 29 gravity. By 2020, an entire wave of hypertappers had taken over the scene.
they broke through the wall.
They were pushing past level 29, deep into the high 30s. The score limit of 999,999, which took decades to master, was being achieved so regularly that tournament organizers literally had to modify the cartridges to display hexadecimal numbers for scores over 1 million, allowing players to roll over the score counter.
Let me stop and think about the human element of this. You are vibrating your thumb 15 times a second. That is not a natural human motion. Doing that for a 10 or 15-minute run must be excruciating.
Oh, it was brutal.
The physical toll on the hands, the wrists, and the forearms is immense. People were developing repetitive strain injuries. You can't sustain a jackhammer forever.
You absolutely cannot. And this limitation leads perfectly into the next evolutionary leap. Hypertapping broke the game's digital speed limit, but it was actively breaking human hands in the process.
They needed a better way.
The community needed a physical evolution. If they wanted to push deeper into the game, they had to change how they held the controller entirely.
And that evolution arrived in late 2020, courtesy of a player known in the community as Cheese, or Cheesefish. He completely reimagined the human-machine interface. He invented a technique called rolling.
Yes. To picture rolling, you have to throw away everything you know about holding a video game controller. Traditionally, your thumb hovers over the front of the D-pad, pushing down. A roller reverses this entirely.
Okay, how?
They hold their thumb completely rigid, resting it lightly but firmly on top of the D-pad. They do not push down with their thumb. Instead, they use their other hand, specifically the 4 fingers, to drum rapidly on the back of the controller housing.
It is a profound paradigm shift. They are drumming their fingers on the back of the plastic case, pushing the entire controller up into their steady thumb.
Exactly. By using 4 fingers sequentially drumming on the back index, middle, ring, pinky, They are distributing the physical labor across multiple muscles. It is the exact same motion a pianist uses to play a rapid trill.
Oh, that makes sense.
And to make this even faster, players started wearing specialized friction gloves or rubbing lotion on the back of the controller, allowing their drumming hand to glide smoothly across the plastic without catching.
The speed they achieve with this is incomprehensible. Rollers can achieve up to 30 directional inputs a second.
It's insane.
That is twice as fast as the absolute best hypertappers. They are inputting commands faster than the game processes frames, and the results were immediate and utterly devastating to the record books. The 1 million point max out was a joke now.
The numbers just exploded. In 2021, Cheese used rolling to hit 2.3 million points. The community was stunned. But then another roller, Eric CX, hit 3 million. Then he hit 6 million in 2022. Eventually, a player named Pixel Andy hit nearly 9 million points.
9 million points.
Rolling turned a logic puzzle into a pure biomechanical exploit. By rethinking the physical interface between human hands and a 1980s piece of plastic, teenagers turned what used to be a frantic 10-minute sprint into hours-long marathons of pure endurance.
But wait, if you can roll fast enough to move pieces instantly, and the game's gravity never gets any faster than level 29 speeds, doesn't the game just become infinite?
That's the logical conclusion.
Right. If you can survive level 29 forever, where is the danger? Is it just a test of who needs to use the bathroom first?
That is the exact question the community asked. If gravity isn't the enemy anymore, what is? And the answer is that the danger shifted from the mechanics to the architecture.
The code itself.
Right. Players weren't fighting the speed of the falling blocks anymore. They were fighting the instability of the 1989 code itself. They were fighting the RAM.
Because players were now surviving indefinitely at maximum speed, they sailed right off the edge of the game's programmed map into deep, dark waters. The developers in 1989 never, in their wildest dreams, allocated memory or designed parameters for someone reaching level 100.
Not at all. We need to look at the research of a computer scientist named Mike Birkin. Years prior, he had mapped out the game's code, and an AI program named StackRabbit was used to prove what lay beyond the standard levels.
What did they find?
What they discovered was a gauntlet of software glitches waiting to destroy any player who got too far.
Let's walk through this gauntlet. As you clear lines and the level counter goes up, the game relies on its underlying code to tell it what color the blocks should be for that specific level. It looks up a palette table in the code. But at level 138, the game encounters an integer overflow bug.
Right. An integer overflow is a fundamental concept in computer science. Imagine an old mechanical car odometer that only has 5 digits.
Okay.
Once you drive 99,999 miles, the odometer can't display 100,000. It rolls over to 0,000. The game's memory operates similarly. When the level counter gets too high, the memory address pointing to the color palette overflows.
And what happens then?
It rolls over and starts pointing to random, unrelated areas of the computer's memory areas that hold sound data or processor instructions, and it tries to interpret that garbage data as colors.
This results in pieces dropping in bizarre, unintended, often eye-straining color schemes. Some are blinding neon, some are washed out and barely visible, but the real terror arrives at level 146, and specifically level 148. The community named these the dusk and charcoal levels.
Oh, the charcoal level. At level 148, the overflow bug pulls a specific string of memory that renders the block palette pitch black. And unfortunately, the background of the NES Tetris playfield is also black.
So you are playing the world's fastest game of Tetris with practically invisible pieces.
Exactly.
You are relying entirely on the brief flash of the piece entering the screen and your own peripheral memory of where you placed the previous invisible blocks. It is sensory deprivation at 30 inputs a second.
It's incredibly difficult. But, if a player has the spatial awareness to survive the visual nightmare of the charcoal levels, they encounter a new structural threat starting around level 155.
The crash risk.
Yeah. The actual algorithm the game uses to calculate your score multiplier becomes incredibly inefficient at these abnormally high levels.
Yeah.
Every time you clear a single line, the processor struggles to do the math.
It's working too hard.
It struggles so hard, it takes so many processing cycles, that there is a highly probable chance the entire game will just lock up and crash.
And this brings us to December 21st, 2023. A 13-year-old kid from Oklahoma named Willis Gibson, playing under the handle Blue Scooty, is broadcasting his run live on the internet. He is navigating this exact minefield. He's rolling flawlessly. He survives the invisible blocks of the charcoal level. He reaches level 155 where the crash risk begins.
The tension must have been unbearable.
Every time he clears a line, he is pulling the pin on a digital grenade. He keeps clearing lines, intentionally trying to dodge the specific mathematical calculations that trigger the crash. He reaches level 157, he drops a piece, clears a single line, and the screen freezes. The blocks stop, the music stops playing its melody, and just holds a single, continuous drone tone.
He achieved the true kill screen. For 34 years, humans believed the game of Tetris ended when the blocks reached the top of the screen and defeated the player. Willis Gibson became the first documented human to definitively beat Tetris by forcing the game to defeat itself.
If you are listening to this, I want you to think about that timeline for a second. A game engineered by Soviet and Japanese minds in 1989, released before the modern internet even existed.
It's mind-boggling.
It took 34 years, the collective hive mind of a global community reverse engineering hexadecimal memory addresses and mapping out crash triggers to guide a 13-year-old boy who was born 20 years after the game came out to finally conquer it. It is poetic.
It is a profound achievement in the history of digital interaction. A game designed to be infinite, designed to ultimately crush the player under an avalanche of falling blocks, was brought to its knees by human endurance. The player didn't lose, the machine simply gave up.
Exactly.
But of course, human curiosity is insatiable. If crashing the game was considered beating it, what happens if you actively try to avoid the crash?
Right, because if the game crashes, your run is over. Your score stops. What if you want to keep playing? What if you want to see how deep the rabbit hole really goes?
To go further, the community realized they had to alter the arena. They couldn't play on the original cartridge anymore because the math would always eventually cause a crash.
So they modded it.
They started playing on a modified ROM. A ROM, or read-only memory, is the digital file containing the game's code. Programmers went into the ROM and specifically patched the integer multiplication bugs that caused the random crashes.
Okay, so it's safer now.
Well, the speed was exactly the same. The colors still glitched into invisibility, but the game wouldn't arbitrarily freeze when you cleared a line.
They removed the landmines. They are sailing into the deepest, most uncharted waters of the code. And waiting for them at level 235 is a brand new, unintended terror.
Due to another massive glitch in how the game calculates level transitions, level 235 doesn't require you to clear the standard 10 lines to advance to the next level. It requires you to clear 810 lines.
810 lines on a single level. That's absurd.
And to make matters worse, the color palette glitch for level 235 renders the blocks in an incredibly dark, dull green color against the black background. It is visually exhausting.
It's a pure endurance test hidden inside a visual impairment trap.
But in October 2024, a 16-year-old named Michael Arteaga, known online as Dog Playing Tetris, who, by the way, was the 2020 world champion, faced level 235. He sits there, rolling his fingers, staring at the dark green blocks, and he grinds through all 810 lines. He survives the trap.
Unbelievable.
And he just keeps going, level 240, level 250, until he reaches level 255.
And level 255 is the absolute mathematical limit of the game's architecture.
Yes, 255 is the maximum value that an 8-bit integer can hold in this system. It's essentially 8 binary ones in a row, 1, 1, 11, 1, 11. When Arteaga cleared the final lines of level 255, the internal counter tried to go to 256, but it didn't have the memory space.
So what happens?
It overflowed completely. It rolled all the way over back to 0.
The screen instantly resets to the bright original colors of level 0. The terrifying speed drops back down to a gentle floating crawl. Arteaga achieved the first ever rebirth.
It gives me chills just thinking about it.
He literally played the game so far, pushed it so hard that it turned back into a baby. He had been playing flawlessly, making split-second decisions at maximum speed for 81 continuous minutes. He cleared 3,300 lines.
And the most incredible part, after achieving rebirth, he just kept playing, eventually racking up a mind-boggling 29.4 million points.
If we synthesize this entire journey, it is staggering to behold. We went from a lone Soviet researcher testing rudimentary hardware limits on a monochrome screen to teenagers wearing frictionless gloves, drumming on plastic, proving that human biomechanical endurance can outlast 8-bit digital infinity.
The code is infinite, provided it doesn't crash, but human attention spans and human forearms are not.
And tournament schedules certainly aren't infinite. Think about the logistical nightmare this creates for the classic Tetris World Championship. Because players can now roll indefinitely and survive level 29 speeds for hours, matches were never ending.
They had to step in.
The organizers instituted a super kill screen in tournament play starting at level 39. At level 39, the game is artificially modified, so pieces drop at 2 grid cells per frame.
Twice as fast as the original kill screen.
It is a speed that is truly physically impossible for human eyes to track and react to, finally enforcing an end to the matches.
It's a fascinating meta-narrative. Humans broke the game's intended limits so thoroughly, so completely, that the community had to go in and program new, artificially impossible limits just to make it a functional, playable sport again.
So if they have beaten the kill screen, if they have mapped the crash triggers, and if they have achieved rebirth, what is actually left to do? What is the community chasing right now?
Well, there is currently a massive ongoing race to be the first person to hit 10 million points on a completely unmodified original 1989 cartridge.
Dodging the crashes through pure mathematical luck and precise line-clearing manipulation, the pursuit of perfection never ends.
It really doesn't. Every time a limit is reached, the goalpost moves.
Let's recap this incredible, sweeping arc we have been on today. We started in 1984 with a banned Soviet prototype spreading like a virus. We navigated a chaotic, high-stakes rights battle involving billionaires, diplomatic tension, and sub-licensing disasters that birthed the Game Boy juggernaut and ruined a media empire.
Quite the journey.
We watched Nintendo wage a hardware war against Tengen, establishing a mechanically rigid acoustic version of the game as the definitive global standard. And then we watched a community form around that rigidity. We watched them invent hypertapping to bypass the software's speed limit. We watched them invent rolling using specialized gloves to shatter their own physical limits.
We watched 13-year-olds crash the fabric of the 1980s code, and 16-year-olds achieve digital rebirth.
And that leaves us with a final concept to mull over. Think about the physical controllers and the digital interfaces we use today. We have incredibly advanced haptic feedback suits. We have precision VR gloves that track individual finger joints. We have eye-tracking motion sensor.
Yeah, the tech is incredible.
Yet a simple rectangular piece of gray plastic with a cross-shaped D-pad designed in the 1980s with zero ergonomic foresight was manipulated in such a wildly unintended biomechanical way as rolling 35 years after it was manufactured.
It makes you wonder, what latent, entirely undiscovered human techniques are hiding in the technology we interact with every single day?
Exactly. Are we using our current tools, our keyboards, our touchscreens, our smartphones to even a fraction of their actual physical potential? Or are we just waiting for a teenager 30 years from now to look back at our advanced technology and show us we have been holding it wrong the entire time?
It's a humbling thought about the profound relationship between human adaptation and digital design. We build the tools. Potentially, we have to rebuild ourselves to master them.
To you listening to this, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you are on a 10-hour flight or you happen to boot up an emulator or an old Game Boy and you zone out to those descending shapes, maybe you will look at that simple game and those simple plastic buttons just a little bit differently.